welcome to Fabian Women's Network. The Fabian Women's Network event today is All in This Together, Women with No Recourse to Public Funds and COVID-19. My name's Kindy Sandhu and I'm Vice Chair of Fabian Women's Network, and I'll be chairing tonight's event. So let me just tell you a bit about Fabian Women's Network. We're a thriving network of women where we aim to achieve social and political change and to participate in public life. We've got a historic and long-standing link with Fabian parliamentarians, and we're a big wing of the Fabian Society, which is Britain's oldest left-of-centre political think tank. So just to be minded that we're recording tonight's event. So let me start with the panellists, introducing the panellists. We've got three panellists today. Let me start with Pragna Patel, who's director and founding member of Southall Black Sisters. Southall Black Sisters have been involved in defending human rights of BME women who are particularly victims of domestic violence for a long time. Southall Black Sisters also campaign against religious fundamentalism. Pragna, I read that in July 2015, you were co-recipient of the inaugural Bob Heppel Equality Award. And I had to look up Bob Heppel, and he was a former lawyer of Nelson Mandela. And in 2011, Pragna was named one of the top 100 women activists and campaigners. Our next panellist is Liam Byrne, MP for Birmingham Hodge Hill. Liam has a sterling parliamentarian career. You were Immigration Minister, and he was also former Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Liam is currently Labour's West Midlands mayoral candidate. We do have a third panellist, Baroness Helena Kennedy QC, who will be joining us in just a few moments, but I'll tell you a bit about her before she arrives. Baroness Kennedy has a string of awards and accolades to her name. I'd be here all evening if I had to go through them. She's essentially a Scottish barrister and broadcaster and a Labour member of the House of Lords. Helena has a string of noble credits to her name, but foremost is her book, Eve Was Framed, Women and British Justice, which was published in 1993. Helena Kennedy is currently Fellow of Royal Society of Arts. So welcome to you all. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Just a bit of housekeeping. We have a hashtag, which is Fabian Women's Network, No Recourse Public Funds. So it's all the letters FWN, NRPF. So please retweet and post, etc. So the timing, I apologise that we started a bit late. We had some technical issues, but we will aim to finish within the hour. The chat function, along with all the other Fabian events, has been disabled this evening. So the structure is that each panellist will have 5 minutes to talk about a particular theme related to women with no recourse to public funds, and then we'll move on to the question and answer session. Now, the way we've decided to do tonight is that we've asked people to send in the question and answer sessions via the Q&A box, rather than people appear via video and audio. We felt that for some people who may be experiencing destitution, etc., due to no recourse to public funds, that for anonymity and confidentiality and for safety, that we would just use the Q&A box for questions and answers. So again, please be aware that the webinar is being recorded. So for those who can't make tonight, they'll be able to watch the recorded version later on the Fabian's YouTube channel. So without further ado, I'd like to go straight to Pragna, if that's okay. I don't know if Boris Johnson's watching us tonight, Pragna, but I thought I'd first of all ask you what no recourse to public funds is actually is, and then if you could tell us a bit about what the life experiences are like for women with this, and in terms of the work that you do with Southall Black Sisters, and also how worse or what other conditions have happened since the pandemic. Pragna, we can't.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Kindy, for the great introduction. And thank you, Fabian Society, for inviting me to what I really think is a really important and very significant discussion. And I'm also delighted to be sharing this platform with Helena when I see her, and of course, the Right Honourable Liam Byrne MP. But I seriously hope that, Liam, you in particular will listen to what I have to say, because I can't help feeling incredibly alarmed and frustrated at the failure of this government, and let's face it, previous governments, to face some really uncomfortable truths about the inhumane and discriminatory nature of our immigration system that they have created and sustained over the years. I mean, I'm talking particularly about the hostile environment immigration policy. It didn't happen overnight. It's been building up over the years, and we're now just seeing some appalling consequences, of which the Windrush generation scandal was one. I mean, I don't know where to start, but in terms of the work that we do, what I want to start by saying is at SBS, at least 60% of the women that we work with have been abused and have insecure immigration status. Some of these women are dependent on their partners or spouses for their immigration status, and others arrive in the UK through other immigration routes. After years of struggle, we achieved some changes in immigration law for abused women in terms of obtaining protection if they leave the abuse, but only if they've arrived in the UK in the first place on spousal visas. But if there are migrant women who have come under other immigration routes or via other immigration routes and don't have spousal visas, then those women are particularly in a precarious position. What we find is many of these women are simply too scared to report their experiences of abuse because of their insecure immigration status and because of what is known as the no recourse to public funds condition, which also makes them economically dependent on their abusive partners who used no recourse to public funds and their lack of status as a weapon of coercion and control. The no recourse requirement is a legal restriction. It's imposed by the UK Border Agency on people subject to immigration control, preventing them from accessing non-contributory welfare benefits and social housing. And breaching this condition puts a person's current or future right to be in the UK at risk. So if women do exit from abuse, they become destitute and they find themselves unable to access refuges or other safe alternative accommodation or even welfare benefits due to the no recourse condition. And as a consequence, many abused women with no recourse are left homeless and penniless, and often forced to find other means of survival that are full of immense risks and dangers, or to reconcile with their abusers. And I think your audience should have a sense of what that's like in terms of their daily realities. On a daily basis, we see women with no recourse who have slept rough on the streets. On one occasion, we saw a severely beaten woman who was found wandering the streets with her 4-year-old son. She could hardly walk. In another case, we found a woman sleeping in an alleyway next to our office because she felt that she had nowhere to go and thought that we would support her, but felt that the office was closed and that we would see her in the next day. So she was bedding down for the night in the alleyway. We happened to find her. On yet another occasion, a woman's husband and in-laws abused her and forced her to sign a so-called voluntary return document, which was duly arranged by the Home Office. And she ended up being rescued at the airport when she finally managed to contact us. We have seen women who come to us who are severely malnourished because they haven't eaten properly. And many have physical and mental health problems. Many arrive with only the clothes that they are wearing, and some don't even have proper footwear. Often women are rescued by police, but because they have nowhere to go, they end up spending a night or two in the police station itself in a cell. And on other occasions, they're arrested, detained, and deported without having access to legal advice and support. And the COVID-19 crisis has brought with it additional challenges and risks. It's been deeply disappointing to us that at this moment of unprecedented crisis, the government has chosen not to lift the no recourse condition for migrant people. And it's absolutely glaring the way in which they just excluded migrant people, migrant populations from whatever protective measures they have put into place. So women with no recourse continue to lack access to the welfare safety net. But it's not just the existence of the no recourse requirement that perpetuates what I think are racial and gender inequalities. It's also the promotion of a culture of surveillance, whereby immigration policies require key frontline services to perform immigration enforcement functions and move them away from their first and foremost duty, which is to protect and safeguard vulnerable people. And that culture of surveillance has also impeded women's ability to seek help. And we see this on a daily basis. We actually have submitted a super complaint in relation to police policy on reporting women to the Home Office if they report domestic violence. And we've also bringing judicial review proceedings on the same subject. You know, recently the UK government published the Domestic Abuse Bill, which has been touted as a landmark act that's going to offer a lot of protection to all women. But in reality, it's already failed to deliver protection for migrant women on non-spousal visas subject to no recourse. They're effectively excluded from the few protective measures that are contained in the bill. And so we're having to campaign really hard. I mean, this is a major campaign on our part to try and ensure that protections for migrant women are placed on a statutory footing in the bill. And you know, I just want to say this, when George Floyd kept uttering the words, "I can't breathe," it was as though he was speaking for the many women that we see who are literally trapped in abuse and made to live in conditions of utter destitution and degradation. And why? Because we have a compassionless immigration system that sustains social inequality and injustice and exclusion. And in the current crisis, this is the central paradox. The very migrant people that this government has deemed disposable through the operation of the hostile immigration policies, the migrant cleaners, the nurses, the porters, the care workers, the kitchen staff, the delivery persons, these are the very people that the government also relies on to form the front line in the fight against COVID-19, crisis. And actually what I'm saying loud and clear, and I hope people will join me, is a government can't have it both ways, because people can see through this kind of injustice and inequality. And what connects our concerns about migrant women, the COVID crisis, the Black Lives Matter, even the Windrush scandal and the Grenfell scandal, is that they all show up the glaring inequalities that exist and persist in our society. And what they're also all about are political choices that have been born out of opportunism, illiberalism, and neoliberalism. These are not, crises that have just happened out of nowhere. They have come out of political choices that have been made. And these choices have rested on the assumption that some lives matter more than others. But going forward, what I would say is this doesn't have to be the new normal. We cannot and must not go back to business as usual. We really need to seize this moment and do things differently. But to do that, we really need some honest self-reflection. We need courage, we need imagination, and most of all, we need solidarity to really make a difference. So my plea to those who are listening is please use your influence, your contacts to support our campaigns, to ensure that no recourse to public funds is lifted, and to ensure that abused migrant women have access to the welfare safety net. And if people want to, they can go to our website to get more information about our campaigns. So I'll just stop there, Kindy. Thank you.
Thank you, Prarthana. that is a whirlwind of social injustices against migrant women, the heartbreaking stories that you've given. And almost it feels like we talk about barriers, but it actually feels like what you're talking about is a fortress that every which way these women turn, they don't have safety and they don't have respect and they don't have dignity. So thank you for that insightful talk. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure those watching tonight do as well. Can I just welcome Baroness Helena Kennedy. Thank you for joining us. No worries. I know you had some technical issues, so we're really, really pleased to have you. Would you like to go next, or
sure.
Yeah, you want to go next?
I'm sorry, I was being technically inept or something. Zoom was not letting me in, so I apologize for being, but I actually could hear you. I could hear you, but I just couldn't manage to so I was here from the beginning. Can I just start by saying that it's wonderful to be here, and and Kindy, you described me as a Scottish barrister, but in fact, although I'm a Scot, I'm an English barrister. I came down and studied law and remained here, and have been a practitioner here for over 40 years. And I now chair the Institute of Human Rights for the International Bar Association. So human rights, and particularly on the international frame, has become the area of my work. But in Parliament and in the legislature, I'm very involved on human rights issues, and I see this as a human rights issue. This is undoubtedly a human rights issue, and I want to just say, and it's nice to see Liam here, but Pragna is the person that I really know, because I learned so much from her. When she and I first met, it was many years ago. I mean, more than we'd like to count, and Southall Black Sisters had come into existence, and we did many cases which were around the issues of racism, the ways in which women who came here, often brought here for marriage, and then experienced domestic violence, how that played out. We did many cases involving, unfortunately, homicides where women who'd been abused ended up killing their partners. And if anyone taught me about racism, it was this woman. She taught me, because what you do as a human rights lawyer, I knew about human rights to some extent because of my own class background. You learn a lot of stuff as you grow up, especially if you grow up in working class Glasgow. But Pragna was a person who really, really gave me my insights into the issues that affect the Black community, and we really have to take this stuff seriously. And I'm so thrilled that this is a moment where racism seems to be being addressed. But by God, we haven't addressed it well enough inside Parliament. And I won't rehearse the feelings of governments, but I was involved in them over the years. What I wanted to say was that just before lockdown, I mean, actually it was just after lockdown began, Parliament was closing down 23rd, 24th of March. And I went into Parliament, although I'm in the kind of vulnerable age group now, I went into Parliament wearing my gloves and my and a mask and stuff to get in there. I went on the tube, there was nobody on it and everything, for the last sitting. And do you know why I went? It was to speak on this subject. It was to speak about the fact that there is no recourse to public funds for people. And we knew that this was going to create real problems, because so many of the charities that provide, a sort of a lifeline for people, we're all going to have to close down too. And so I asked in that last debate, and made a nuisance of myself, saying what is going to be done about people who have no recourse to public funds, because they won't be able to get this stuff that's on offer, furloughing and all those things, or will they? And will you make special arrangements so that they are? And the minister made sort of harumphing noises and said that it would all be looked into and nobody was going to be left behind and all of that. But of course it wasn't true. And so this is an issue that has really been a source of shame to us. I really feel that it should be a source of shame to us. On the 6th of May last month, a case was brought in a judicial review, went into the divisional court, and is a case that's worth any of your the watchers tonight might want to look it up, because it was involving a boy. It was brought on behalf of a child, W, and his mother as his sort of, if you like, his joint person in the action, who's referred to by the initial J. And it was a case that was really to drive home what happens when you have this kind of rule. Because she was a woman from Ghana who'd come here. She was given her status was that she had leave to remain, which you have to keep applying for every sort of 18 months or every, I can't remember what the immigration law is, not my area of expertise, but they would frequently have to be applying to have it renewed. But you could work, but you're not allowed to access public funds in any way. You don't get child allowance, you don't get anything. She was a care worker. If COVID has taught us anything, is about the ways in which care workers are being treated and the devaluing of care workers and the way in which they live on the gig economy. And of course, she was doing it in mental health, and she has ended up being in very real difficulties because she also is, as I understand it, vulnerable. The case is worth reading, and it really is a shocker, because it's about the ways in which people suffer, and what they always throw at you is that local authorities are supposed to, under Section 17 of the Children Act, which was a piece of legislation in 1989, and then there was another Children Act during the years of Labour in government, but it was to place a duty on local authorities to safeguard the welfare of children. And but of course, austerity over the last 10 years has meant that local authorities, they haven't got revenues for this, and they find any excuse for not including families in that designation of people who are in need of additional funding because the welfare of a child is at stake. And unfortunately, it means that people are living in destitution. The case that was brought in May was found in the favour of the child and his mother. And it was because, and the article that was used from the European Convention on Human Rights was Article 3, which was that it was cruel and inhumane treatment to use this rule in the way that it's being used. And it's so often used against women. And so I really want to say to everybody tonight, this really is something that we have to be campaigning about. And I'm afraid that Labour over the years has got its knickers in a twist on immigration, and is a bit like Law and Order, about trying to, on the one hand, be in competition with the other party. We shouldn't go there. Our values are different. We have to not go down that road, and we have to find other ways of doing it. There is no third way. Forget, we've done all that stuff. This has to be dealt with differently, and we are supposed to be the people who have values and who deal with people in a way of compassion. And so and in fairness and justice and all that stuff, that good stuff, talking about the common good, talking about the things that we share. Anyway, the domestic abuse bill is before Parliament, and it's going to be coming into the House of Lords. It's certainly going to be an area where we can strengthen it. The government's claiming it as a great badge of honour that they're bringing this state-of-the-art domestic violence bill through. Well, let me tell you, it's got many shortcomings, but the one that we want to talk about today is the way that this particularly affects Black and minority ethnic women. And I really, well, people actually, because men too can suffer from this stuff. But we've really got to try and find a way of using this bit of legislation. And the great thing is, Southall Black Sisters and other organisations have been highlighting the ways in which we can insert things into this bill. And the thing that we're really wanting to press on everybody to be campaigning in their constituency parties, to be campaigning with their members of parliament, is to get something through, and to do it in Conservative seats too, and to say this is not right, that we're allowing this to happen, and that people are living on the poverty line, scraping existence, going hungry because they can't feed their kid. And so the domestic abuse bill is a way of breaking that hostile environment thing. You know, I just think that it's a moment to seize. You know, again, it's like Pragna has just said. You know, we're making a lot of noise about Black Lives Mattering, but you know, there are real things here where we can make a difference, even as a party in opposition. We should be raising the bar, speaking of the moral importance of this, and so to our politicians. I never think of myself as a politician. I might be in the legislature, but I'm not a politician. I'm a lawyer, and I'm a human rights lawyer. And the thing about human rights is that they're for everybody, and there's no hierarchy in it, and there's no people of better value than the next person. And I was brought up by a mother in class who said, you must never look down on anybody, and you mustn't look up to anybody either. And I've never learned to do that. And so that's what we have to teach all of our children. That we are all of value, and this business of not helping people who are in real need is a disgrace. We have to end it now.
Thank you, Helena. That was I don't know if you and Prada had a conversation before, but both your speeches today have like fitted together so well, like a jigsaw. And I'm really glad that you talked about children, because quite often, and I know that Pragna, you know, has been campaigning a lot about what happens to children and where are children in all of this, and how local authorities are not considering the needs of children. So thank you for raising that case, and we'll put a link on about that case if people want to find out more about it. So thank you.
I'll give you it's the Home Office. It's in fact RV, the Home Office, and it was May of this year, 2020.
Okay. Thank you. So coming over to our final panelist, Liam, for the next 5 minutes. I know, you know, I've introduced you as our as Labour's mayoral candidate, and you've, you know, quite unusually, but a good thing, you've produced a women's manifesto. So I guess the question, and I know that Pragna's already laid a gauntlet to you about no recourse to public funds. So what is your vision, and within the manifesto for women, how does women with no recourse to public funds, and children, I guess, feature within that? And what is your vision for supporting and campaigning on this issue in the West Midlands?
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for inviting me along, and it's a real pleasure to follow Pragna and Helena, because I think my starting point is to basically agree that this is a moment that we have to seize. And our approach has got to be based on an insistence on human rights and justice. Now, as many people know, the starting point for our mayoral campaign and the selection last year was about 4 or 5 years worth of work on homelessness, first in Birmingham, but then more widely through the West Midlands. And what you learn in the Coventry Night Shelter, or the work of the Good Shepherd Ministry up in Wolverhampton, or the soup kitchens on Ree Street, where I used to work on a Sunday night, is that you cannot make homelessness history unless you change the law around no recourse to public funds. I mean, it's literally impossible to make homelessness history unless we change this. And when we have done polling here in the West Midlands, we are clocking now, in the last poll we did, about 80% support for ending homelessness. So people simply think, you know, in the second city of the 5th richest country on earth, 6th richest now, it is simply not acceptable that we have people sleeping on the streets. But you work with most of our homeless charities, you know, and they will tell you that a good half of the people that they're working with are in this struggle. So as we headed into the selection manifesto, we decided actually that the first manifesto that we would publish was our women's manifesto, and that was the first manifesto that we published. To write it, we gathered together a lot of testimony from women around the region, but also from women who were being protected by Women's Refuges, Women's Aid in Birmingham, plus a number of others. And that basically helped us crystallise 4 basic political objectives. So 1, ending the discrimination that women face at work. 2, ending pregnancy-related discrimination and easing the pressure of caring responsibilities. 3, we have a political problem at the West Midlands Combined Authority, where there are basic imbalances of power. And 4th, creating pathways to safety for women. And here we felt that no recourse to public funds was a significant issue, but these were compounded by other injustices built into the system. So the knock-on consequences of no access to the legal system, the destruction of legal aid, the destruction of advice services, a very significant multiplier of problems. And then there's a whole slew of problems in the housing system. So in the West Midlands, the way Women's Aid describe it is the system is now silting up. You can't move people fleeing violence into a place of safety because the housing supply just basically isn't there. And in the services that we've got, there is now a complete inadequacy of counselling and other support services. And so, where Helena is right is because local authorities have been skinned back so hard, there's no resource to step in to fix these services. And so what we want to try and do in the West Midlands is pioneer a different Labour approach to solving this problem. And so the concept that we are putting forward, and this is my second point, is we would like to become, in the West Midlands, Britain's first region of sanctuary. Now, that would, we think, entail a number of responsibilities to step up to responsibilities around being a safe place for refugees. But crucially, we think it means transforming the pathway to safety for women at risk. And that is partly about providing advice and legal services, but it is also about providing the housing and support services as well. And we think that the Metro Mayor can step in to fill many of the voids, both in legal services and local authority services, that have opened up over the last 10 years. The third point, the final point I want to make, is that I think this is a moment to push ahead assertively, because the government is now caught on the horns of its own contradictions. So on the 15th of June, ministers wrote to one of my colleagues who's helping me work on this, Councillor Sharon Thompson in Birmingham. And I just want to read the key paragraph because it exposes the contradiction. So it says, the government is clear that no one should be without a roof over their head. No one without a roof over their head. And we remain committed to ending rough sleeping within Parliament. The legal position on those with no recourse to public funds has not been amended, and the government expects local authorities to support people who are sleeping rough and to minimise unnecessary risks to health. So, in the space of one paragraph, the government is trying to say, yes, on the one hand, we expect you to fix this problem, but on the other hand, we've got no intention of changing the law. Now, if this tangle is not sorted out over the next kind of month or two, then many of the people that have come in and under the everybody in policy are literally going to be turned back out on the streets. And so I just don't think, certainly in the West Midlands, I just don't think people are going to stand for that, because they felt that this was a moment when we showed above all that we are a compassionate society, and it is by pulling together, when the chips are down, it's by pulling together that we are getting through this in something resembling one piece. The idea that we can now respond to this surge in solidarity by saying, you know what, we're going to go back to the old ways of doing things. And if that means people being thrown out onto the streets and sometimes dying there, well, then so be it. I don't think people are going to go for that. And so I think for all sorts of reasons, this is a political moment to advance. And, we in the West Midlands, we would like to be a pioneer of this, and we would like people's help in getting that policy right.
Thank you for sticking to time as well, Liam. I think you've raised some very important points, and the region of sanctuary for the West Midlands is obviously a very key policy, and I guess sanctuary has to involve not just physical sanctuary, but sanctuary from the movement of data that is used against women, and the involvement of immigration when women go to seek services. So it's sanctuary against a lot of things. And I'm optimistic, shall I say. I choose to be optimistic about people pulling together, but I guess as us politicians, we are accountable to ensuring that that is taken forward and progressed, and that we don't see it as a moment of it's popular at the moment and we should be on the jumping on the bandwagon. That actually no, we carry on and sustain and make sure that we campaign as Helena has suggested earlier. So thank you, panelists. I'm being asked to remind everybody to submit questions and answers. I forgot to say that earlier. So please do submit your questions. We've got a number already and people are voting, which is really good to see. So I would encourage you to ask questions. Now's your chance. The first question I've got here is from Lorraine, and Lorraine is part of a very fantastic organisation we have here in Coventry called Coventry Asylum and Refugee Action. And I do hope, Liam, that you'll get a chance to come and visit Carrick sometime. And her question, she says, my questions are if everyone agrees that immigration and asylum system is racist in nature. So what are we waiting for before we can free the people affected by this system? So I think that's a fair question to probably ask all of you, if you don't mind spending just a minute answering, each of you answering that question. So Pravda, should we go in the same order? So just to give Liam a chance to have a breather. Pravda, would you like to go? Sorry.
Sorry, I was unmute myself. Yes. So the question is, the immigration asylum system is racist. Absolutely. You know, we need to be frank here. We need to say things as they are. What really concerned me around, you know, the time of the Brexit vote and the debates that were going on was that immigration became one of the issues around which Brexit was fought. And however much people tried to say that there are racist undertones to the whole public debate, it was felt, including by many of the, all the politicians, that no, this is not racist, that one can talk about immigration without being racist. The problem is that the language in which this whole debate around Brexit and so on was couched was one of inclusion, exclusion. And it's always been a racialized system and is always operated in a racialized way. History is littered with the ways in which certain people who don't fit profiles that this country likes are kept out, and those that fit the profile are let in. And I remember, even as I was growing up, seeing the ways in which white South Africans, Australians, Canadians, people from New Zealand were always welcomed in, whereas the others were seen as scroungers and, you know, people who coming in to lower standards, you know, bring their awful ways of life and don't want to integrate and so on. And yet what we have seen is an immigration. So that was complete odds with the way in which this country has been built and who by. You know, the NHS system, the industries in which particularly Black and migrant people work, you know, they have built this country along with everybody else. But we never saw that celebrated. We never saw that reflected. And that is something that Black Lives Matter movement is trying to raise, that, you know, this country is a country upon, you know, that has been built by people that you have tried to keep out. During the COVID-19 crisis, the very people that are being kept out are the very people, not just at the upper ranks of the NHS, but even those at the lower ranks, you know, who are propping up the NHS through cleaning for hospitals, looking after elderly, looking after the mentally ill. You know, these are the very people that have been denigrated, that have been made to live in awful conditions of racism and, you know, made to feel unwelcome. You know, a long time ago, when my father first came to this country, he was an economic migrant. And he said to me, and I wasn't born here, but I came here from the age of 5. And he said to me, as we were growing up, never feel comfortable in this country. Never feel comfortable because they will never accept you. Always be ready to move on. We are migrants. We will have to move on one day. And I said, don't be silly. Nobody wants to push us out. We're here. We contribute. You work. Nobody will push us out. And his response was, nobody will deliberately push you out, but they will create a hostile environment that will make you want to go. And, you know, all those years ago, in the early 70s, he was talking about the creation of a hostile environment. And I just laughed at him and poo-pooed the idea. And now I know what he was talking about. I understand what he was talking about. And if he was alive, I would say to him, you are so right. You are so right that those of us who come from a different culture, who have a different color, can never feel that this country is ours, despite the fact that we contribute, that we are productive, that we actually civilize a country that does not want to accept equality. You know, let's turn this whole civilizational discourse on its head. It's not the West that came to civilize us. We have come here to civilize the West and to teach the West what equality is about and what it should be about and why it should be valued. You know, these are the things that I think we need to talk about when we talk about a public debate about and doing things differently. We have to learn from these mistakes. We have to be honest and put our hands up, even if we're politicians, and say, we got it wrong. We got it wrong. We admit it. But we want to learn and we want to do better, not just for us, for the generations that come after us. And it's so important that we really mean what we say when we say now is a moment of reckoning. I believe it is. I'm optimistic. I think we can do incredible things. We have seen young people do incredible things and take the lead. You know, I am optimistic, but is the system racist? Yes, it is. And I think we can start by admitting that.
Thank you. Thank you. So much of what you say resonates with my own personal experience, I have to say, and the lens through which I see the world. And I just want to give an opportunity to both Helen and Liam, if you want to respond to that question, or we can move on to another question.
And now you can understand why I've learned so much from doing work in big cases with that woman at my side. I just want to mention a number of things. Yes, the system is racist, and but we've seen it manifest in so many different ways. Look at the business of people who work in the National Health Service as porters and as people who are doing important jobs, not getting their own health care covered by the NHS. That was a shameful and shocking thing, and people didn't know that was going on. The idea that bereaved families, if they were in this category who were of unsettled status, that they were going to end up not getting the bereavement grants, and those differentials that were being made, and there are long lines which inevitably, we know affect certain people and not others. There are a number of the questions have come up. I've done a quick look at them, and I'm just going to come in and then you can leave it to others. But Jane Middleton was asking the question, does that decision that was made that I referred to in the courts that took place in May around COVID and about and people being left destitute, the decision can be invoked against any council for any person, even a single person. Someone asked, would it work for a single person, somebody who doesn't have children? What the case is saying is that Article 3 says that to leave people so that they're destitute is cruel and inhumane conduct. And so, it contravenes the human rights of people. And that is whoever you are. And it doesn't matter whether you're single, or you've got a child or not. This case happened to involve a child, and there is something that could have covered a child, but was not being used for a child. But you can take this, use this case in any circumstances where you are being left destitute. Now, I want to just mention something for Liam, which is that in many of the circumstances where we're talking about refuges for women to flee to with their children when they're being abused and battered, can I just tell you something? Refuges are not able to take people in who've got no recourse to public funds because they don't get housing allowance. And if you don't get housing allowance, then the refuges can't survive without your housing allowance being the contribution you make to their existence, so they can't make a bed available to people who've got no recourse to public funds. And so women are often turned away because they're going to fall into that category. People are also afraid to report matters to the police, like domestic violence and so on, because they're afraid that they're going to be reported to the Home Office, and they'd have no trust that the police won't do that. And so, you know, is it any wonder? And then someone's asking a question, and I'd like to pass it over to you, Liam. Who invented no recourse to public funds? Somebody's asking that question, and they want to know the answer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. I was going to ask the same question. I just, for a contextual perspective, I don't know if you know the history, Liam, about how we've ended up with this restriction on immigration status.
I think I don't know if the question is aimed at history. You know, if
it was aimed at history. The question is, who invented this? How did it come into being? How did it come into being that people would have no recourse to public? They couldn't get child allowance, they can't get housing allowance, they can't get benefits. How did that come into existence?
Well, because I think of mistakes that we made in office. I mean, that's what people are asking. Was that a Labour invention, or was that a Tory invention? Yeah, look, I mean, I think that the evolution of policy from probably about 2001 onwards entailed significant mistakes. And certainly, you know, when I went into the Home Office 14 years ago, I mean, people, you know, don't necessarily remember this, but I went in May 2006 after the system had been described as not fit for purpose. And the immigration justice system had basically collapsed. And so, you know, I sought to bring forward a number of reforms that doubled the asylum rate. 20,000 people were given asylum, you know, while I was the minister. But without doubt, you know, we made mistakes and I made mistakes. The direction of policy that we sought to take was to take a greater and more forensic aim at people trafficking. So the first step, actually the first significant decision I took, was to try and ensure that we signed the European Council on Convention on Human Trafficking in order to strengthen protections. But, you know, was the system perfect by the time, you know, I left it? Absolutely not. Were further mistakes made? Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's, you know, important that we are honest and we reflect on some of those errors. And, you know, what I want to try and do in the West Midlands, not alone, but with a tremendous coalition of people, is to try and pioneer a different way of doing things. Because I think, you know, the truth is it's a long road back for Labour. You know, the Tories have got a big majority. We're going to be in opposition for another 4 years. But what that does give us is a chance in places like the West Midlands, in places like London, in places like Greater Manchester. It does give us a chance to pioneer new approaches, like Region of Sanctuary is one example, but there are many others. So that we have, when we go into office, you know, after the next election, a different philosophy, a different culture, a different system, and a different set of practical reforms and legislation that is ready to go. And, you know, if I can contribute to that here in the West Midlands with a great deal of others, then that would be all to the good. But we will need help in getting those ideas right. Absolutely, we'll need help.
That's great.
Right.
That's great. It's really great hearing you describe what you're planning to do. It's really great.
And
well, it's a collective. It's been a collective effort. I mean, and we published a women's manifesto just as a starter for 10. I mean, about a quarter of it is devoted to pathways to safety. There are 6 or 7 significant proposals in it, but it can't and mustn't be the finished product. These are ideas that need significant enhancement.
Thank you. Pragna, did you want to come in on that?
No, I very much welcome the idea of regions of sanctuary. I very much welcome Liam Byrne's attempt to self-reflect and, be honest about Labour's own history around immigration, the immigration system. I think that we are in a very difficult period. I don't know, I get a sense that we have a government that's not listening. Certainly in the kind of ways that we want it to, even in terms of just showing a little bit more compassion, let alone, see change in the culture around immigration, asylum issues. So I very much welcome and encourage the idea of creating regions of sanctuary. And it would be really great to continue having this discussion about what that should look like, to imagine what that could look like. And I, for one, would really welcome further discussions around how that can also make sure that women with no recourse, abused women, have not just access to the welfare safety net, but to legal aid, to lawyers, so that they can, access the courts and assert their rights. There's a strategy to be developed, a coherent, coordinated strategy that the government's not going to do in relation to violence against women and migrant women. And to do that, we will need to address a series of overlapping and multiple barriers that migrant women face. So yes, we envision a strategy being developed and being used, and we'd be very happy to share that with you as part of your vision for a region of sanctuary for West Midlands.
Well, I think that's a really, really important point tonight, actually, about taking forward your policy around City of Sanctuary, Region of Sanctuary, Liam, and I hope that we can coordinate and have an event where people like Southall Black Sisters, organisations like Southall Black Sisters and many other organisations could maybe have an event and have a discussion with you how we can take this forward. Liam. I think I've muted and then you've muted. Sorry, I'll let you do it.
Sorry, okay, cool. Yes, I mean the concept was developed with Refugee Action UK as a starter for 10, and it includes, I mean, there's quite a lot in it. So it includes actually a reasonably big ambition around stepping up to some obligations around Syrian refugees in particular, but it's also got quite big implications for the education system. So, in Birmingham, actually, it's been a couple of my local schools in Hodge Hill have helped pioneer this, providing schools as places of welcome. And so, you do quite quickly get into pretty wide-ranging conversations about system reform across public services. And so, if there is a way, now the elections have been moved back 12 months, if there is a way of using this time to really deepen and broaden the concepts and crucially build that kind of coalition that will help implement it, then that would be super welcome. Because, Labour's history over the last century is that we can use these significant moments of, we use these moments of opposition to renew, often in local government. I mean, that's what we did in the 30s, that's what we did in the 80s, and that is absolutely what we've got to do now, I think.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, do the panelists, I'm just going to read it out, so it's quite a long question. Do the panelists agree that those in power need to finally establish sustainable funding of refugees independent of means tested benefits, such as housing benefits, in order to ensure that all victims receive immigration status can seek safety when they most urgently need it. In my experience as an IDFA, that's independent domestic violence advocate, I think, or advisor, I can't remember now, finding a refuge space for a victim with no recourse to public funds on spousal visa under Section 17 of the Children Act is almost impossible. So actually, Liam, this question is for you. How does Liam Byrne, MP, envision the funding of refugees to changing to safeguard destitute migrant victims?
Well, I think the truth is there are two elements to this. So the truth is that we think that there's resources within, say, a metro mayor across an area as big as the West Midlands to provide those quite specialist resources. The legal side of it, I think, has now been rendered a bit more ambivalent. I mean, I'll defer to Helena's judgment on this, but you know, in the letter that I read out at the beginning, you have a clear contradiction in the space of 4 sentences in a paragraph back from a minister about the balance of the obligations that are now being sought from local authorities. So on the one hand, authorities are expected to act within the law, but on the other hand, the government is clear that no one should be without a roof over their head. So I kind of think that there's an arguable case there. And so I think it is going to come down to local authorities, in this case, you know, the office of the Metro Mayor, basically pushing ahead.
Okay. Helena, did you want to come in on that, or?
Only to say that I do think that there will be, this will give rise to case law, undoubtedly, that there will be cases brought. I'm saying that that government has made it clear that there is a duty on local authorities. The problem, of course, as you said, for local authorities is that they don't have the resource coming from central government, because as Pragna said, neoliberal economics have screwed the whole business, because if you minimize the size of the state, and if we've learned anything over COVID, is that you need a state that is an enabling state, and it has to be. If you have reduced the size of the state, you do not. You have low taxation. You're allowing people to become enriched and the poor to get poorer, and big gaps to take place in our society. Then inevitably, and you then shrink the money that is going to local authorities. How can you abide by those responsibilities that you've described as being the government making a commitment to housing? How do you deal with the business of providing refuge to women, migrant women and so on, who need refuge and who are going to refuges for it, and the refuge saying, well, we need the money to cover the cost of having you here? Then you really do need to reinvent the economic system. And it's why I do hope that this is the moment where that argument is made. My fear is that in 2008, we had an economic crisis. I saw it as being a great moment where I, like many people who are probably watching tonight, I thought this is when the big change is going to happen, and it didn't. And it's because we know the vested interests there are in keeping this system going as it is, and to keep neoliberal economics being the basis for this. And we made a mistake in government where we actually, kept too many of those things going, the Thatcherite agenda, and built on it. And in fact, here is now a moment for us to say it has to be different. We have to do something, and climate change and everything has taught us that we have to rethink the economic model on which we're basing things. And now is our time.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of the time. We're coming towards the end of our hour. And so just one final quick round question to each of the panelists. If I've forgotten what it is now, sorry. Oh yes, I remember now. With the kind of, in your mind's eye, the viewers that are watching today, what do you feel or believe is the one thing they can take away from today that would actually support women with no recourse to public funds? So if you can say it in 30 seconds, I'd really appreciate it. Pragna, shall I go with you first?
Join our campaign. Please, please use your contacts, your influence to push this. The no recourse to funds, 20 years ago, nobody knew what that was. Nobody, discussed it. Now there is, I believe, and this is the optimism in, the optimistic me, there is a consensus building that there's something morally wrong, legally wrong, politically wrong with no recourse to public funds and what it does in terms of institutionalizing destitution and inequality. We have to get rid of it. Join the chorus, of voices against it. Raise it wherever you can. Use your influence, use your contacts to, we can bring it down. And I think we have to bring it down, and we can do it. So go to our website, lots of information there about why no recourse is a problem for women, but also for others, as Helena has pointed out. That's my takeaway.
Thank you. Liam, what's the one thing you would like people to take
Well,
away?
so I would agree with that, and I would say push hard and push now, because the reality is that in about 6 weeks' time, significant numbers of people are literally going to be thrown back out onto the streets unless this issue is resolved now. And, seriously, are we going to go from lockdown into moral meltdown and throw people back out on the streets after all of the sacrifices that we have made? I cannot believe that this country is going to stand by that. We have made, some significant victories in Parliament around free school meals, around support for NHS workers, so we know this government can be, pushed. So let's push now and push hard.
That sounds like a delivery cry. Push now, push hard. Takes me back. Push it back. Helena, the floor is yours.
I'm just going to say finally that, of course, I absolutely agree with Pragna and Liam, and that we have to push and push hard. And I'd like us to get this piece of change through in the domestic violence bill. But I want to say one last thing, which is one of the things that we should also feel really proud of, as well as our NHS and the great things that Labour has done, is the Human Rights Act. That is a piece of legislation, and it's taken a long time for people to realise just how powerful it is as an instrument for change and to protect us all, and that it talks about how we're all to be valued in the same way, and our humanity is something that is so important. This COVID crisis has taught us all of that. And so all I would say to you is, do champion the Human Rights Act. We should feel really proud of it. It was a wonderful achievement, and it's a tool in our hands to make for our better society.
Thank you. That's a fantastic way to end tonight's event. Thank you to everybody. Thank you especially to the panelists for taking the time, doing all of the preparation and coming tonight to speak to us and give us those really, really valuable insights. And I hope that people have been able to take things away from this. I know I have. Thank you for all of the viewers today watching, and we love hearing from you. Thanks for all the tweets that we've been getting. People in the back end of the call today, the event today, have been managing all of that communication. So I just wanted to also give, these sorts of events can't happen without people like Pragna and Helen and Liam, but also people that you don't see on the screen. So for example, Sarah, who's our chair, and Mumtaz, who've been handling all of the questions on the back end, making sure I keep to time, etc. Katie Curtis from Fabian's, who did all of the technological work beforehand. And tonight, Kelly and Sarah, who've been managing the communications. So just before I finish, just to say we've got some couple of great more events coming up. We've got one on the 1st of July with Angela Rayner, who's the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. And we've got another event, that's on the 1st of July. And on the 25th of June, there's an event with Rachel Reeves, who's actually looking at rebuilding post-corona. So I hope she's listening today, but if not, we'll make sure we get these messages out to her for that event. So thank you again, and please tweet and have a good evening. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.